Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. We're talking today with Tim Aalders. Tim, how are you?
I'm great, Lane. How are you?
Well, I'm fantastic, and if I wasn't, I'd lie about it, so guess what I am. Tell me a little bit about yourself. You're running for the Senate, I understand.
Yeah, the U.S. Senate.
U.S. Senate?
Don't ask me why. I tried to figure that out
myself. Well, there goes the interview. I can't ask you why.
You know, I've spent my whole life in Utah.
Were you born here?
Born, raised in Utah, to son of immigrants. And I love this state. I love the country. And I'm truly disappointed at the direction it's going. You know, we have to make some changes, or we're leaving behind a terrible mess for our posterity.
Well, that's a great statement. Where were you born?
West Jordan, Utah.
West Jordan, I've heard of that.
So,
I have a daughter that lives in South Jordan.
well, that's a
Close enough, huh?
pretty area too. So,
Well, tell me about your history, what you've done in your life.
so I've been everything from a business consultant to operations manager for some large box stores. I'm a husband, married, going on 30 years next month. 31 years next month. Better get that right.
Well, you better get that right. You're in trouble.
Father of 3 kids. My oldest, my daughter, passed away within the last year
Oh, I'm sorry.
from a rare genetic heart disease, so that's tough. So, been a national radio host.
Tell me about that.
You know, it was after the crash in 2008, 2009. I was really frustrated with nobody supporting Main Street business, just the direction our country was headed in financially. So I started a program called Buy Back America, supporting Main Street businesses. And then it grew into a program called Freedom's Voice Media. I've spoken with pretty much every U.S. senator, every congressman, interviewed political authors, people on both sides. Yeah, on the radio.
What channel?
Have a face for radio.
Okay.
So it was good. It was at a K-Talk out of South Jordan, Utah, and it was on different stations throughout the country.
K-Talk was the home station?
Home station.
I've heard of that. What the...
KTKK, third oldest talk radio station in the country. So,
Where's it located on the dial?
South Jordan, 1640 AM right now.
1640. I knew someone that worked there. What was his name? Died recently.
Mills Crenshaw?
Mills Crenshaw. My twin brother and he were on the original talk station there.
Yeah.
100 years ago.
100 years ago. Long time talk radio host there.
Yeah.
So, passionate about the country.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, no. So, you spend a lot of time researching, studying the Constitution, watching what members of Congress do and don't do. You pay too close of attention to the promises they make and then the promises they break. And it's depressing. Something so simple, they've created such a dynamic mess in Washington, D.C., and there's no need for it. So I somehow got, in 2012, I ran as a Republican against Orrin Hatch. And I saw just how establishment money keeps the status quo going in Washington, D.C., and just how easy it is for people to not research a vote just to make it based on name recognition.
Are you still a Republican?
You know, I'm an American citizen. I'm a person who loves the country. I'm running on the Constitution Party this year, but Republican by heart and by nature. I'm still a Republican. Most of the Republicans in the Republican Party are no longer Republicans.
What are they?
Socialist establishment members.
Oh. So. SEM?
Yeah, that's a good acronym for it.
Well, you know, a Republican in name only is a rhino.
Yep.
Maybe we should change that to SEMI, semi.
Yeah, a semi. Yeah, you know, the Constitution's not difficult. And if the power still rested with the states, then the states would have more influence on what happens, and we'd have more influence over the politicians. Having it so far away is like being in corporate USA and having a board of directors back east trying to tell you what the customers of Utah want and the customers of California at the same time. You know, you don't go through the same style of clothing at the same time. You have different views and opinions on life. So having the federal government have so much influence over our lives when in no way do they have a clue of what's going on with Main Street families here in this country.
If you got in, what would you do differently?
You have to communicate. I love when Ronald Reagan said you have to talk before you can do anything. And
you have to be able to talk.
Yeah, talking is not arguing, calling each other names, and trying to destroy the country from within because you don't want the other side to succeed. It's really scary when they do that. You know, everybody asks me, you know, well, you'd be a junior senator. Well, no, there's nowhere in the Constitution that says that there's a senator and a junior senator. Junior senator is terminology used by the Republican and Democrats because they want you to understand that you're a brand new senator and that you're junior to them. They have more power than you, and they will tell you when you can vote and when you can talk or debate. The cool thing about the way our government's set up is if I was the only Constitution Party member, I would have equal time to discuss every piece of legislation that the Democrats and Republicans had. So there's no being junior when they're given 2 hours each on a piece of legislation, and then I'm given 2 hours.
So you'd have the most time.
I'd have the most time. I have nobody to give it to.
You'd be a senior senator.
I'd be a senior senator. Not a senior citizen. Not there yet. So senior senator.
Well, I'm not either, but some people think I am. Senior citizen.
The other thing that bothers me is, and I ask this question all the time, when was the last time you saw your congressperson or your senator? You only see them during campaign years. How do they represent the people of Utah when the only time you see them is when they're asking you for their vote?
Well, isn't that a naive approach to think they actually represent us?
It's a truly naive. They represent the money who sponsors them to get to Washington. But one of the pledges I've made as I'm traveling around the state is that every year I will meet with every county in every city in the state. I'll meet with every mayor and city council. I'll meet with the legislators of our state, and I'll update them on current legislation that is pending votes in Washington and what my review of that legislation is, whether it's constitutional or not. You can't bring Utah's values and Utah's voice to Washington if you live in Washington. If you don't spend the majority of your time when you're not voting, meeting with lobbyists, going out to lunches, going to football games, you should be here talking to the people. It's a full-time job, and the full-time job is to represent the people of Utah.
What are specifically some of Utah values that are different from Washington values?
You know, that's a tough one. Utah is very family-oriented, and I'm not saying the rest of the country's not family-oriented. We have our neighbors' backs. I'm proud of Utah when a neighbor or a family member struggles, you help. Sometimes in big cities across this country, when a neighbor's going through trouble, you don't help. Our country's really great when another nation's going through issues to donate and help. But Utah's like that all the time. And the citizens of this state will pick up and go help the flood victims, in Texas and Louisiana and Florida. When they had issues, many volunteers from our state go to help. So much so that our leaders have to tell us, sit back and wait a minute. Don't just rush out there trying to help. Let's get organized. Because we really are a compassionate, family-oriented state. And it's still a state where you know who your neighbors are. You have a lot of neighborhood and church involvement, not just the one church, but lots of different churches in the state now, and they're very active in their communities. We're very land-based and outdoors people here in Utah. We love the outdoors. We love the lakes, the rivers, the streams, the wildlife. We tend to enjoy it even though we don't control it. We're independent. We take care of our own. We network well. We help people find jobs. We've just always been what this country once was, because we're slower to change than other states in this country. We don't grasp on to socialism as fast as everybody else. It's coming, but we're slower to kickstart.
Well, that's a conservative, isn't it?
Well, that's a conservative. And I like to tell people I'm going to be the only conservative on the ballot in November.
Or maybe in Washington.
That's probably true, but conservative values, I think a lot of people have them. They're just afraid to share them. And when people see somebody standing up for faith, family, and freedom again in Washington, they'll say, well, why isn't my representative doing that? And it could create change, and the change that we need.
Well, there are still several people running for Senate, aren't there?
Right now, the Democrats guaranteed. We know who that's going to be. The Republicans have a primary between Mike Kennedy and Mitt Romney. You have the Libertarian candidate and you have the Independent American candidate out there, just like every year. So this is a little different with the Constitution Party. We're actually running a legitimate campaign. We have campaign managers, we have campaign consultants, we have fundraising organizations, we have consultants. So we are legitimate this year, and we need to be recognized as so.
Are there other Constitutional Party candidates in the other races, the congressional races?
No federal candidates. Some state representatives are running, but yeah, not many.
Okay.
I think 4 or 5.
So you're the only national candidate?
I'm the only national candidate.
Tell me about your family. How'd you meet your wife?
In high school.
High school?
Yeah, we're high school sweethearts. We married in 1987 after she spent a year at Utah State. My wife is an amazing lady with multiple degrees, very compassionate, caring.
What's her name?
Lori. It's Lorrie.
Lorrie. We have a daughter named Lori, Lori. So.
Yeah, and some of the greatest things you can achieve in life is being a father. It makes you want to pull your hair out, makes you want to cry for joy. Sarah was our firstborn.
How old is she?
Sarah was, she'd be turning 26 this year.
She's the one that passed away?
She passed away, yeah. I can't explain the grief of losing a child.
I cannot understand. It must be horrible.
Oh, it is. It's nobody can. Everybody tells you life will be better. No, it won't. It'll be different. This year, I was planning on grandkids, and
was she married at the time?
She was married for a year. Died of a rare genetic heart disease, sudden. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody knew she had it.
Are the other members of the family at risk?
We've all been tested, and as of now, no. My one son has not been tested yet. He's in Canada on a mission, my youngest.
Whereabouts?
Montreal. So French speaking. Comes home May 25th, the day my daughter passed away. So.
He's coming home this month?
This month.
Well, I'm on my way to Toronto.
Are you? He says it's cold there, just so you know, still.
Well, it was 60 degrees this morning when I walked.
Well, that's better than St. George was last night.
That's right. It was 50 degrees here when I walked.
So, yeah. So, and then my middle son, Brandon, he works with the family business. We're home builders. We help people build their dreams. So.
You know, in the old days, they had house raising, and everybody came and helped.
Yeah, barn raising.
Barn raising, yeah.
Yeah, it was fun, a lot easier, saved people a lot of money.
Yeah.
Can
we get back to that somehow?
I wish, you know, when you see houses go from 100,000, 125,000 just 6-7 years ago to a starter home being 450, it's like your wages didn't increase that much. There's a problem.
Where do you build?
Utah County, mostly. I've built in Salt Lake. I've built in Ogden. So.
Where did you go to school? Did you go to university?
I went to Utah State for a bit, but I have a Master's of Life.
Masters of Life. Well, I like that.
I love to research and read and study, and you know, I moved myself up in every business I've ever been in. I come from an era where hard work mattered.
Well, that was a long time ago.
And shaking somebody's hand and making a promise counted for something. So.
We've got some questions down here about land and water and so forth. How do you feel about that?
You know, I sit and watch the land issues in Utah all the time. And the federal government was never meant to own land. They shouldn't be landowners. But the state of Utah needs to make a plan on how they're going to manage the land.
Right.
And I see them wanting the land back, but I keep waiting for that plan on what they're going to do with it. And I think the land needs to be more local. So if you're talking about land associated with southern Utah, I think the people of southern Utah should determine what should be done with the resources, what should be done. You know, everybody says it belongs to everybody. You know, the resources in Utah belongs to New York. Well, if that was true, they should have moved here.
Or move the land back there.
Yeah, or move the land back there. You know, southern Utah belongs to the people of southern Utah. They settled here. They built businesses and families here. It irritates me on a local level that the state doesn't get committees formed locally to get the views of the population here on what they'd like to see. Because the people who live in St. George are outdoorsy people. Even the older, you see them walking, riding bikes, they love their trails, they love the desert, they love to paint the scenery. They enjoy it. So they should have a say on what goes up around their house, just like it was meant to be.
You mentioned two of your children, the third one.
Brandon. Ethan's on the mission. Brandon's the one who works with me building homes.
Okay,
he's down there running the business.
Okay.
Married, still just under a year, happy. Both my boys graduated college before they graduated high school. So.
You're kidding. How did they do that?
They went to one of those technical schools associated with a college.
Which college?
UVU. Utah Valley University. They've changed it a couple times. So they have a program there where the kids go and they start attending college from day one as their high school. And their college graduation was actually 2 weeks before their high school graduation.
How old were they? 18?
Brandon was not quite 18. He was 17. Ethan was just turned 18 when he got his.
So you live in Utah County?
Live in Utah County, Highland. So I was born here. We went to school here. We have our businesses here.
Sounds exciting.
Always lived here.
What do you think about term limits?
You know, I used to be one of those Constitution people that said the term limit should be with the people in the vote. But then I realized the people don't know how to vote. And I believe we need to have term limits. I think government is meant to have fresh ideas and new views. And if you get too comfortable with government, then it's no longer service, it's a job. And it's a job you fight to keep and not fight to change. So yeah, I don't believe anybody should be in government longer than 2 terms in the Senate, and that's even pushing it, and 4 or 5 in the Congress.
Well, Orrin Hatch, when he was running against, I think it was Ted Moss.
18 years, we need to bring him home.
Well, what he said, what do you call a senator who's been in Washington 2 terms? You call him home.
Yeah. You know, I look at it, Lon, I'm not going to age myself, but after my first term, I hope to groom somebody during my first term to take over and fight the fight, because I want to enjoy my family. I have a lot of plans to spend with the kids and traveling with my wife and having that quality time.
You could go into television or something.
You know, I have a face for radio. I've told you that. So, you know, it's one of those things. You can accomplish what you can accomplish in a short period of time, or you know it's going nowhere.
When I interviewed Rand Paul during the presidential elections, I drove up to Orem to do it, and there was a deal going around on the internet at the time that Congress should be limited to 2 terms, one in office and one in the penitentiary. And I said that to him as we were interviewing him, and he kind of sort of laughed. And he said, well, there's still some people in Congress that are honest. I didn't ask him to name them, but.
You know, there's honest and there's integrity. If you have integrity and you're in a system that you're not actively trying to change, I've watched politicians for years talk about getting rid of agencies, but I've never seen one legislator actually write the piece of legislation that would do it.
What agencies should we get rid of?
All of them.
Well, that's a novel approach.
Well, you know, every agency should be handled on state levels. People say, oh, Tim, you don't like clean air, you don't like roads. Yes, I do. But it's easier if the state of Utah was in charge of the pollution in Utah, because we didn't have to go all the way to Washington to complain to the EPA, who then gets paid off by some large corporation to ignore it. We control what's in our backyards better than what Washington can control here. Schools, we can control our kids with our values.
You mentioned schools, Common Core.
Opposed. I don't think there's one system, and especially a bad system, to educate our children. You look, ever since the Department of Education was created, the education rankings of the United States has fallen. We fall well below almost all other organized countries established. So, yeah, all these agencies, they're not approved by the Constitution. It was basically Congress not wanting to do their job. They wanted to campaign instead of operate a government. So they took the Senate from the people, from the states actually, and gave it to the people. So the states lost power.
Originally, senators were appointed, weren't they?
Senators were appointed by the state legislators. Right. So you'd have to, right now, I'd be pleading my case to the state legislator and the governor to appoint me as a U.S. senator. And if they didn't like what I was doing, they could bring me home. You know, it's always a simple sell to people when you say, shouldn't you control your own destiny? Shouldn't you control who your senator was? But in actuality, they did, because they had local representatives that were vetting these senators before they sent them to Washington, D.C., so they had more voice in who their senator was. Right now, they vote for a senator and send them back to Washington, D.C., and the only person that they are influenced by is lobbyists or special interests.
Count my vote.
Count my vote's a tough one. I believe in the caucus system because money makes primary elections just insane. And I did go through the convention system as a Republican, though, and money influenced that, too. You know, I traveled the whole state, meeting with delegates everywhere. Charter school here in St. George, met hundreds of dedicated delegates. And then that's the year they switched the delegates out 2 weeks before convention, or 3 weeks is when their term ended and they had new ones. So it was an impossibility for anybody to go.
So you met with the old?
I met with the old 2010 delegates, and the new 2012 got in. They moved convention forward. So there was just no time to get your voice out. So when we had our convention booths, that's one of the other problems is they sell to the candidates booths, and the big money candidates can use Washington money to buy almost the whole floor and private speaking rooms, and can give out cowboy hats like Senator Hatch did that year. And
is he a cowboy?
He wanted to be. He's from Pennsylvania, so I'd say no. But you could basically, your money influences. I think he spent up to $10 million through convention that year. That's just insane.
It is insane.
So I love the convention system. It has some flaws, but it's still a lot better than gathering votes. You don't even have to be part of a party. You just say you are, and go knock on doors. You introduce yourself to a person, they're going to say, yeah, you have a right to run. Here, let me sign that. Not knowing anything about you. So Utah had a unique system, and it worked better than what it will work without it.
Well, the presidential elections are sort of a caucus system. They elect delegates from the state that go to the
Electoral college.
Right. That's a
And
caucus system.
it's a caucus system, yeah. Which the popular vote would be horrible, because we'd have basically the Democratic states, which are fewer than the conservative states,
Right.
choosing the president every year.
Right. We've got a minute and a half left. What's your final words?
I always tell people to research their candidates. They can go to timaalders.com, and my name is 2 A's, so Tim, Aalders, and look where I stand. I've always stood on the side of the Constitution. And, that's what matters. Will we stand up and fight for what we believe in, or will we waver? In November, I'll be the only candidate on the ballot that stands firm with the Second Amendment. I'll be the only candidate on the ballot that is pro-life. I'm the only candidate for a party that's not responsible for $1 of the debt this country faces right now.
Hey, that's clever.
Well, people always say, what has the Constitution Party done? And I always say, what haven't we done? We're not responsible for the debt. We're not responsible for any of the agencies. We're not responsible for taking away state sovereignty. So that's a good start.
Sounds good. Well, Tim, thanks for being with us on A Story to Tell.
I appreciate it, Lon. Thanks for taking the opportunity to interview all candidates, and not just what the establishment thinks should be candidates.
Well, we're equal opportunity punishers. So.
Well, that's good. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much. I enjoyed traveling down to southern Utah.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being with us on A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University.